The small voice cut through the noise of pneumatic tools and rumbling engines like a knife through silence. Jake Thompson froze, his wrench suspended mid-turn, motor oil dripping forgotten from his fingertips onto the concrete floor. The question hung in the air of the busy auto repair shop, so innocent and yet so devastating that it made his chest tighten with an ache he hadn't felt in years. "Sir, I don't have a daddy. Could you fix this?" Jake slowly turned from under the hood of the blue sedan he'd been working on, his eyes searching for the source of those heartbreaking words. What he saw made him forget how to breathe for a moment. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, stood just inside the bay door of Thompson's auto repair. Her dark curls were pulled back in 2 neat ponytails tied with bright yellow ribbons that matched her sunshine dress. In her small hands she clutched a broken red toy car, one wheel hanging loose and the paint chipped from obvious love and play. But it wasn't the broken toy that made Jake's heart skip. It was the way she looked at him with such complete trust, as if he really might have the power to fix something as complex and painful as a missing parent. Her brown eyes were wide and hopeful, filled with the kind of faith that only children possess. The belief that adults can make anything better. Jake started then stopped. In his 12 years working as a mechanic, he'd fielded thousands of questions about engines, transmissions, and brake pads. But this was territory he'd never navigated before. He set down his wrench and crouched to her eye level, his work boots scraping against the floor. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Kyla Williams," she announced proudly, then held up the broken car. "My car is broken like my family. Mommy says some things can't be fixed, but Tommy at school said you can fix anything with a motor. Does my family need a motor?" The innocence of the question hit Jake like a physical blow. Here was this beautiful little girl, trying to understand the complexities of family dynamics through the only lens that made sense to her young mind, mechanical problems that could be solved with the right tools and expertise. Jake glanced around the shop, suddenly aware that the other mechanics had stopped their work to listen. Old Pete Martinez was leaning against a toolbox, his weathered face soft with sympathy. Danny Kim had emerged from under a pickup truck, grease-stained and curious. Even the shop radio seemed to have lowered its volume, as if the whole world was holding its breath for his response. "Well, Kyla," Jake said carefully, his voice gentler than it had ever been, "families are a little different from cars. They don't exactly need motors, but they do need something special to run right." "What do they need?" she asked, stepping closer with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that some problems can't be solved with socket wrenches and determination? How do you tell her that missing fathers can't just be ordered from a parts catalog and installed like a new carburetor? "They need love," he said finally. "And patience. And people who care about each other." Kyla's face scrunched up in concentration. "I have lots of love. Mommy has patience, 'cause she waits for me to tie my shoes even when I'm really slow. But we might need more people." She looked up at him with sudden inspiration. "Are you people?" Jake couldn't help but smile at her logic. "Yes, I'm people." "Good people or bad people?" she asked with the directness that only children could manage. "I try to be good people," Jake said, meaning it more than he'd meant anything in a long time. "Then maybe you could help fix my family," Kyla said matter-of-factly, as if it were as simple as tightening a loose bolt. "First though, could you fix my car? It's broken and Mommy doesn't have money for new toys right now." Jake took the red toy car from her small hands, examining the damage. The wheel had come loose from its axle, and the tiny plastic engine was rattling around inside the clear hood. It was a cheap toy, probably from a dollar store, but it was obviously precious to her. "I think I can manage that," he said, pulling out a small screwdriver from his shirt pocket. "But first, where's your mommy? Does she know you're here?" Kyla's eyes widened as if she just remembered something important. "Oh, she's at the store next door buying cleaning stuff for work. She told me to wait by the window, but I saw your sign that says you fix things and I thought maybe..." She trailed off, suddenly looking uncertain. "Am I in trouble?" Before Jake could answer, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed from the parking lot. A woman's voice, tight with panic, called out, "Kyla! Kyla, where are you?" Jake stood up just as a young woman appeared in the bay door, her face flushed with worry and exertion. She was beautiful in a way that caught him off guard. Not the polished beauty of magazine covers, but something real and warm and immediate. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore dark jeans and a simple white blouse that suggested she was dressed for work. But it was her eyes that struck him most, the same warm brown as her daughter's, but filled with a mother's fear. "Kyla Elizabeth Williams," she said, relief and exasperation warring in her voice. What did I tell you about wandering off? I didn't wander, Mommy, Kyla protested. I had a mission. This nice man is going to fix my car and maybe help fix our family too. The woman's eyes snapped to Jake's face, and he saw embarrassment flood her features. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. She didn't mean, she doesn't understand. She hurried forward and placed protective hands on her daughter's shoulders. Kyla, you can't just ask strangers to fix whatever you asked him to fix. But Mommy, he's good people, Kyla insisted. And he said families need love and patience and people who care, and we have love and you have patience, so maybe we just need more caring people. Jake watched the woman's face cycle through embarrassment, pain, and something that might have been longing before settling into composed politeness. I'm Tanisha Williams, she said, extending a hand that trembled slightly. And I'm really sorry for whatever my daughter said to you. Jake Thompson, he replied, taking her hand. Her skin was soft but her grip was firm, the handshake of someone who worked hard for everything she had. And she just asked me to fix her toy car. Nothing to apologize for. Tanisha's eyes searched his face, looking for judgment or mockery but finding neither. The car I can pay for, she said quietly. How much do you charge for toy repairs? For beautiful little girls who believe in magic? Jake said, kneeling back down to work on the tiny car. The price is one smile and maybe a story about how this car got so loved. Kyla beamed and launched into an elaborate tale about racing her car against imaginary opponents while Jake worked with careful precision to reattach the wheel and secure the loose engine. He was acutely aware of Tanisha watching him, her guard up but her curiosity evident. As he worked, Jake found himself thinking about the question that had started it all. Sir, I don't have a daddy. Could you fix this? The simple, heartbreaking honesty of it had shaken something loose inside him that he'd kept carefully locked away for years. Looking at this little girl and her obviously devoted mother, he felt a yearning he'd thought he'd outgrown, the desire to be needed, to be part of something bigger than himself. There you go, he said, handing the repaired car back to Kyla. The red paint still showed its chips and scratches, but the wheel spun freely and the engine no longer rattled. Good as new. Kyla clutched the car to her chest and beamed up at him. Thank you. You really are good at fixing things. Do you think you could come to dinner sometime and meet our family? It's just me and Mommy, but we make really good spaghetti. Kyla. Tanisha's voice held a note of mortification. But Jake found himself smiling at the little girl's boldness. That sounds like a pretty good deal, he said carefully. But that's something your mommy would have to decide. He stood and looked at Tanisha, seeing the internal struggle playing out across her expressive face. She was caught between her daughter's innocent enthusiasm and her own adult caution, between hope and the fear of disappointment. We should go, Tanisha said finally. Thank you for fixing the car. How much do I owe you? Nothing, Jake said. It was my pleasure. Tanisha reached into her purse anyway. I insist on paying something. Tell you what, Jake said, an idea forming. If you really want to pay me back, bring your car by next week. I heard it hesitating when you pulled into the parking lot. Probably just needs a tune-up, but I'd like to make sure it's safe for you and Kyla. For a moment, Tanisha looked like she might refuse. Then she glanced down at her daughter, who was making happy vroom vroom noises with her newly repaired car, and something in her expression softened. Okay, she said quietly. We'll come back next week. As they walked toward the door, Kyla turned back to wave at Jake. Bye, Jake. Thanks for fixing my car. Maybe next time you can work on fixing my family. Jake waved back, watching them disappear into the bright afternoon sunlight. The shop seemed quieter somehow, emptier, as if their brief presence had filled a space he hadn't realized was hollow. Old Pete ambled over, shaking his grizzled head. Well, I'll be damned, he said. In 40 years of turning wrenches, I've never seen anything like that. Like what? Jake asked, though he knew exactly what Pete meant. That little girl just asked you to fix her broken family like it was a carburetor, Pete said. And the look on your face. Son, I think she might have fixed something in you instead. Jake picked up his wrench and turned back to the sedan, but his mind wasn't on the engine anymore. It was on brown eyes filled with trust, on a mother's protective love, and on a question that had shaken him to his core. Sir, I don't have a daddy. Could you fix this? Maybe he couldn't fix Kyla's family. But as he worked on the engine in front of him, Jake found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, they could all fix each other. Tanisha Williams gripped the steering wheel of her aging Honda Civic so tightly her knuckles had gone white. In the rearview mirror, she could see Thompson's auto repair shrinking in the distance, but the memory of the last 20 minutes burned in her chest like acid. She pulled into the parking lot of the grocery store where she worked part-time and sat for a moment, trying to compose herself before her shift started. "Mommy, are you sad?" Kyla's voice drifted from the back seat, where she was contentedly playing with her newly repaired car. "No, baby," Tanisha lied, forcing brightness into her voice. "Mommy's just thinking." "About Jake? He was nice. And he had really pretty blue eyes." "Did you see them?" Tanisha had seen them. They were the kind of blue that reminded her of clear summer skies, honest and direct and impossibly kind. When he'd looked at her, she'd felt exposed, as if he could see right through all her carefully constructed walls to the lonely, tired woman underneath. "Kyla, sweetheart, we need to talk about what happened back there," Tanisha said, turning in her seat to face her daughter. "You can't just walk up to strangers and ask them to fix our family." Kyla's face scrunched up in confusion. "But why not? He fixes things. That's his job. And our family is broken, isn't it? You cry sometimes when you think I'm sleeping." The words hit Tanisha like a slap. She'd thought she'd been so careful, so strong. The idea that her 6-year-old daughter had been carrying the weight of her mother's sadness was almost unbearable. "Oh, baby," she whispered, reaching back to smooth Kyla's curls. "Our family isn't broken. It's just different. Smaller than some families, but not broken." "Then why do you cry?" Tanisha closed her eyes, searching for words that could explain the complexity of adult emotions to a child's heart. How could she tell Kyla that she cried from exhaustion, from loneliness, from the crushing weight of trying to be everything to everyone? How could she explain that sometimes she mourned not just for the father Kyla had never known, but for the dreams she'd given up, the life she'd planned that had never come to be? "Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're tired," she said finally. "Like when you cry when you need a nap, except grown-up tears are more complicated." "Maybe Jake could help," Kyla suggested with the simple faith of childhood. "He made me feel better just by fixing my car. Maybe he could make you feel better too." Tanisha's throat tightened. "Sweetheart, Jake is a stranger. We don't know anything about him." "I know he's good people," Kyla said firmly. "And I know he has gentle hands. Did you see how careful he was with my car? Someone with hands that gentle wouldn't hurt anybody." Out of the mouths of babes, Tanisha thought. She had noticed his hands, calloused from years of manual labor but surprisingly graceful as he'd worked on the tiny toy. There had been something almost reverent in the way he'd handled Kyla's treasured possession, as if he understood that to a child, a broken toy could be as devastating as any adult heartbreak. "We'll see him again next week when we take the car in," Tanisha said. "But Kyla, I need you to promise me something. No more asking strangers to fix our family, okay? Our family is fine just the way it is." "Okay, Mommy," Kyla agreed, though Tanisha could hear the reluctance in her voice. As Tanisha walked into Chen's market for her afternoon shift, she tried to push thoughts of the handsome mechanic out of her mind. She had bigger concerns than blue eyes and gentle hands. Like the fact that her car really was making that hesitating sound Jake had mentioned, and she couldn't afford expensive repairs. Like the stack of bills waiting on her kitchen table and the child support payments that never came. Like the exhaustion that seemed to seep deeper into her bones every day. "You're late," Mrs. Chen observed as Tanisha tied on her apron. "I'm sorry. My daughter had a situation that needed handling." Mrs. Chen's expression softened. She was a grandmother herself and had always been understanding about Tanisha's parenting responsibilities. "Everything okay?" "She asked a stranger to fix our family," Tanisha said with a rueful laugh. "Apparently she thinks we're broken." "Children see things we don't always want them to see," Mrs. Chen said gently. "Maybe not broken, but perhaps missing something?" Tanisha busied herself restocking the produce section, trying not to think about Mrs. Chen's words. She'd worked hard to create a stable, loving home for Kyla. They had routines and traditions. They read stories together every night and had pancakes every Sunday morning. They were doing fine on their own. But as the afternoon wore on, Tanisha found her thoughts drifting back to the auto shop. She replayed every moment of the encounter, from her panic when she couldn't find Kyla to the gentle way Jake had spoken to her daughter. Most men either ignored children completely or talked down to them, but Jake had treated Kyla like a real person worth listening to. And then there was the way he'd looked at Tanisha herself. Not with the calculating appraisal she'd grown used to from men who saw a young single mother as easy prey, but with genuine respect. He'd asked for nothing, expected nothing, just offered kindness with no strings attached. "You're distracted today," Mrs. Chen observed during a lull between customers. "Sorry? I'll focus." "Is it the man who helped your daughter?" Tanisha looked up in surprise. "How did you?" "You get a certain look when you talk about him. Like you're trying not to hope for something." Mrs. Chen's words hit closer to home than Tanisha was comfortable with. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Hope led to disappointment, and disappointment was something she'd had enough of to last a lifetime. It's not like that, Tanisha said. He was just being nice to Kyla. And to you. Tanisha thought about Jake insisting she bring her car in for service, about the way he'd refused payment for fixing the toy, about the genuine concern in his voice when he'd mentioned the car's hesitation. Maybe, she admitted. Good men are rare, Mrs. Chen said. But they do exist. My husband, he was good man. 37 years married, and he still brought me flowers every Friday until the day he died. I'm not looking for a husband, Tanisha said quickly. I have my hands full with Kyla and work. Who said anything about husband? Mrs. Chen asked with a sly smile. I just said good men exist. What you do with that information is up to you. The rest of Tanisha's shift passed in a blur of customers and restocking. But as she drove home, her car making that telltale hesitation Jake had noticed, she found herself thinking about next week's appointment. She told herself it was just about the car, just about being a responsible parent and making sure their transportation was reliable. But deep down, she couldn't deny a flutter of anticipation at the thought of seeing those honest blue eyes again. At home, while Kyla played with her repaired car in the living room, Tanisha stood at her kitchen sink washing dishes and staring out at the small backyard where she'd hung Kyla's swing from the old oak tree. This was their life, quiet, predictable, safe. They had everything they needed. So why did it suddenly feel like something was missing? Mommy, Kyla called from the living room, can we have spaghetti for dinner tomorrow? I want to practice making it perfect in case Jake comes over. Kyla? I know. Our family is fine just the way it is, Kyla recited dutifully. But fine doesn't mean it can't get better, right? Tanisha dried her hands on a dish towel and walked into the living room, where Kyla was racing her red car along the coffee table. The toy looked almost new again, its wheels spinning smoothly, its engine secure in its tiny housing. Jake had taken something broken and made it whole again with nothing but patience and skill. Right, Tanisha said softly, settling onto the couch beside her daughter. Fine doesn't mean it can't get better. As Kyla curled up against her side, still clutching the repaired car, Tanisha allowed herself to think about Jake Thompson for just a moment longer. Maybe Mrs. Chen was right. Maybe good men did still exist. And maybe, just maybe, there was nothing wrong with hoping for something better, even if you weren't actively looking for it. But hope was a dangerous thing for a woman who'd been disappointed before. Hope could lead to heartbreak, and she had more than just herself to protect now. Still, as she tucked Kyla into bed that night and listened to her daughter's prayers, and please bless Jake, God, because he fixed my car and he might fix other things too, Tanisha found herself wondering what it would be like to have someone to share the load, someone to help carry the weight of single parenthood. She pushed the thought away as quickly as it came. They were doing fine on their own. They didn't need fixing. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of their small house settling around them, Tanisha couldn't shake the memory of gentle hands and kind blue eyes, or the dangerous flutter of hope that had taken root in her chest despite all her careful defenses. 7 days later, Tanisha found herself sitting in her car outside Thompson's Auto Repair, gripping the steering wheel and trying to talk herself out of going inside. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, and she could hear the familiar sounds of the busy shop, pneumatic tools, rumbling engines, and the cheerful banter of working men. Are we going in, Mommy? Kyla asked from the back seat, practically bouncing with excitement. I want to show Jake how good my car is working. In a minute, baby, Tanisha said, checking her reflection in the rearview mirror one more time. She told herself she was just being practical by choosing her outfit carefully. The navy blue sundress was professional but not too formal, and the cardigan gave her something to do with her nervous hands. It had nothing to do with wanting to look nice for a certain blue-eyed mechanic. There he is. Kyla squealed, pointing through the windshield. Tanisha looked up to see Jake emerging from one of the bay doors, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He was wearing dark blue coveralls with Thompson's Auto Repair embroidered on the chest, and despite the early hour, there was already a smudge of grease on his cheek. When he spotted their car in the parking lot, his face broke into a genuine smile that made Tanisha's stomach do an unexpected flip. Okay, she said, taking a deep breath. Let's go get the car looked at. Jake was walking toward them before they'd even gotten out of the Honda, and Tanisha was struck again by how tall he was, probably 6'2", with broad shoulders and the kind of easy, confident stride that came from years of physical work. Well, look who's back, he said, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. How's my favorite customer doing? Jake. Kyla launched herself out of the car and would have run straight to him if Tanisha hadn't caught her hand. Kyla, remember what we talked about? Tanisha warned gently. Right, Kyla said, but she was practically vibrating with excitement. Jake, look. My car is still working perfectly. I've raced it 1,000,000 times and the wheel never came off once. That's great news, Jake said, crouching down to her level. I told you it would hold up. When I fix something, it stays fixed. The words carried a weight that Tanisha suspected had nothing to do with toy cars. She found herself studying his profile as he examined Kyla's toy with exaggerated seriousness, noting the laugh lines around his eyes and the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. So, Jake said, standing and turning his attention to Tanisha, let's take a look at that hesitation you've been having. It's gotten worse since last week, Tanisha admitted. Especially when I'm starting from a complete stop. Could be a few different things, Jake said, walking around to the driver's side. Mind if I take her for a quick test drive? Just around the block. Tanisha hesitated. The car contained the sum total of her worldly possessions, metaphorically speaking. It was their lifeline to work, to school, to everywhere they needed to go. Trusting it to a virtual stranger felt enormous. I'll be careful, Jake said, seeming to understand her reluctance. And I'll keep it under 25. Promise? Something in his steady gaze convinced her. Okay. Can I go too? Kyla asked eagerly. Not this time, sweetheart, Jake said. Test drives are just for grown-ups. But you can wait right here with your mom and keep her company. As Jake drove away in her car, Tanisha felt oddly vulnerable standing in the parking lot. It was a beautiful morning, warm but not yet hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scents of motor oil and blooming jasmine from the hedge that separated the shop from the adjacent property. He's really nice, isn't he, Mommy? Kyla said, swinging their joined hands. He seems nice, Tanisha agreed carefully. And he's not married. I checked. Kyla Elizabeth Williams. Tanisha stared down at her daughter in shock. You did not check his marriage status. I just asked if his wife liked cars too, Kyla said innocently. And he said he didn't have a wife. That's checking, isn't it? Before Tanisha could formulate a response to her daughter's logic, Jake was pulling back into the parking lot. He parked and got out, shaking his head with a rueful expression. Well, I've got good news and bad news, he said. The good news is it's not your transmission, which was my biggest worry. The bad news is you need new spark plugs, your air filter is clogged, and your fuel injectors could use a cleaning. Tanisha's heart sank. How much are we talking about? 4 parts and labor, probably around $350, Jake said, then quickly added, but I can do it in stages if that helps. The spark plugs are the most urgent. That'll run you about $80 and should fix most of the hesitation. $350 might as well have been $3,000. Tanisha did quick mental math, calculating bills and paychecks and the pathetic balance in her checking account. She started, then stopped, not wanting to admit her financial situation in front of Kyla. Jake seemed to sense her dilemma. Tell you what, he said. Why don't we start with the spark plugs today and we can talk about the rest later? And since you're a referral from my best customer here, he nodded toward Kyla, I can do the labor for free this time. I can't let you do that, Tanisha protested. Sure you can, Jake said easily. It's only about 30 minutes of work and I was going to be here anyway. Besides, Kyla promised to tell me more about her car races while I work. That's payment enough. Kyla beamed up at him. I have lots of stories. Want to hear about the time my car beat a rocket ship? I definitely want to hear about that, Jake said with mock seriousness. But first, let me get your mom's car up on the lift. As Jake worked, Tanisha found herself watching his movements with fascination. There was something mesmerizing about the easy competence with which he handled tools, the way he seemed to instinctively know exactly what needed to be done. His hands were steady and sure, and he explained each step of the process to Kyla, who listened with rapt attention. Why do cars need spark plugs? Kyla asked, sitting cross-legged on a clean patch of concrete near the lift. Well, Jake said, reaching for a wrench, spark plugs are kind of like the car's heart. They create the spark that makes the engine beat. When they get old and worn out, the heart doesn't beat as strong, so the car gets tired and doesn't run as well. Like when I get tired after running around the playground? Exactly like that, Jake said, smiling. New spark plugs are like giving the car a good night's sleep and a healthy breakfast. Tanisha found herself smiling at the analogy. Jake had a gift for talking to children. He never talked down to Kyla but somehow managed to explain complex concepts in ways she could understand. Your daughter's pretty smart, Jake said quietly when Kyla wandered off to examine a poster of engine parts on the wall. She is, Tanisha agreed, pride evident in her voice. Sometimes I think she's too smart for her own good. That's not a bad problem to have, Jake said. My foster mom used to say that smart kids just need more interesting challenges to keep them out of trouble. Foster mom. The casual reference gave Tanisha a glimpse into Jake's background, and she found herself curious about the story behind those words. How long were you in foster care? She asked, then immediately felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. It's okay, Jake said, not looking up from his work. From when I was 8 until I aged out at 18. Bunch of different homes, but the last family, the Thompsons, they were good people. They're the reason I know how to fix things. Is that why the shop is called Thompson's? Jake nodded. Old Pete Thompson took me in when I was 15. Taught me everything I know about engines. When he decided to retire, he offered to sell me the business. Took me 5 years to save up the down payment, but I finally bought him out last year. There was quiet pride in his voice, and Tanisha felt a surge of respect for this man who'd overcome what must have been a difficult childhood to build something solid for himself. That's impressive, she said sincerely. It's just work, Jake said with characteristic modesty. Nothing fancy about it. Owning your own business by, 30? That's more than just work. That's determination. Jake glanced up at her, and she caught something vulnerable in his expression before he looked away. I'm actually 32, he said. But thanks. Mommy, Kyla called from across the shop. Can I ask Jake something important? What kind of important? Tanisha asked warily, remembering her daughter's previous, important question. Not embarrassing important, Kyla assured her. Just regular important. Jake climbed down from the lift, wiping his hands on his coveralls. What's on your mind, kiddo? Do you like spaghetti? Tanisha closed her eyes in mortification. Kyla? Because Mommy makes the best spaghetti in the whole world and we always make too much because we're used to cooking for a bigger family. And I thought maybe you might want to come have dinner with us sometime. You know, so the spaghetti doesn't go to waste. The explanation was delivered with perfect 6-year-old logic, and Tanisha had to admire her daughter's persistence if not her subtlety. Jake looked from Kyla to Tanisha, his expression carefully neutral. That's a very nice invitation, Kyla. But that's something your mom would have to decide. All eyes turned to Tanisha, and she felt trapped between her daughter's hopeful face and Jake's patient waiting. The smart thing, the safe thing would be to politely decline. She didn't know this man beyond their 2 brief encounters. He could be anyone, have any kind of past or intentions. But looking at him now, seeing the way he treated Kyla with such genuine kindness, the way he'd gone out of his way to help with their car trouble, the way he'd shared something personal about his own difficult childhood, Tanisha found herself wanting to take a chance. We usually eat around 6, she heard herself saying. If you don't mind simple food and a very talkative dinner companion. The smile that spread across Jake's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. I can't think of anything I'd like better. Really? Kyla bounced on her toes. You'll really come? If your mom gives me your address, I'll be there, Jake promised. Tonight? Kyla asked hopefully. Kyla, Tanisha warned. Actually, Jake said, tonight works for me if it works for you. I don't have any other plans. Tanisha felt a flutter of panic. Tonight didn't give her time to change her mind, but it also didn't give her time to overthink the decision to death. Tonight's fine, she said. We live at 428 Maple Street. The little blue house with the white shutters. I'll find it, Jake said. Can I bring anything? Just yourself, Tanisha said, then felt another wave of panic as the reality of what she'd just agreed to hit her. She was inviting a virtual stranger to dinner. In her home. With her daughter. But as Jake finished up with her car and Kyla chattered excitedly about all the stories she was going to tell at dinner, Tanisha found herself looking forward to the evening despite her nerves. For the first time in years, she wouldn't be eating dinner alone with just Kyla for company. Someone else would sit at their small kitchen table, someone who looked at her daughter with genuine affection and treated Tanisha herself with a respect she'd almost forgotten she deserved. All done, Jake announced, lowering the car from the lift. Try her now. Tanisha turned the key, and the engine immediately hummed to life with a smoothness she hadn't heard in months. Oh wow, she breathed. It sounds completely different. Like I said, sometimes the simplest fixes make the biggest difference, Jake said, closing the hood. She should run much better now. Thank you, Tanisha said, and she meant it for more than just the car repair. For everything. My pleasure, Jake said, and the way he looked at her made her think he meant more than just the mechanical work too. As they drove away, Kyla kept up a steady stream of chatter about dinner plans and all the things she wanted to show Jake. But Tanisha was quiet, thinking about the evening ahead and the strange turn her carefully ordered life had taken in the space of just 2 weeks. She thought about Jake's hands as he'd worked on her car, competent and gentle. She thought about the way he'd spoken of his foster family with such gratitude despite what must have been a hard start in life. She thought about how he'd made Kyla feel important and heard. Maybe Mrs. Chen was right. Maybe good men really did still exist. And maybe, just maybe, she was about to find out. Tanisha stood in front of her bathroom mirror, changing clothes for the 3rd time in 20 minutes. The navy sundress felt too formal for a simple dinner at home. The jeans and sweater seemed too casual for having a guest. The floral blouse made her look like she was trying too hard. "Mommy, are you almost ready?" Kyla called from her bedroom, where she'd been playing with her toy cars since they'd gotten home from the shop. "Jake will be here soon." "Almost, baby," Tanisha called back, finally settling on a simple green cotton dress that brought out her eyes. She'd left her hair down in loose curls and applied just a touch of makeup. Enough to feel confident but not so much that it looked like she was making an effort. The spaghetti sauce was simmering on the stove, filling the small house with the rich scents of garlic and herbs. She'd made enough for 6 people, a habit left over from the early days when she'd still hoped Kyla's father might come around, might want to be part of their lives. Now the extra portions usually meant leftovers for days, but tonight she was grateful for the abundance. At exactly 6 o'clock, there was a soft knock at the front door. Tanisha took a deep breath, smoothed her dress one more time and went to answer it. Jake stood on her small front porch holding a bouquet of yellow daisies and looking almost as nervous as she felt. He'd changed out of his work coveralls into dark jeans and a light blue button-down shirt that made his eyes look impossibly bright. His hair was damp from a recent shower, and he smelled like soap and something clean and masculine that made her suddenly aware of how close he was standing. "Hi," he said, offering her the flowers with a slightly uncertain smile. "I know you said not to bring anything, but these reminded me of Kyla's hair ribbons." "They're beautiful," Tanisha said, accepting the bouquet and trying to ignore the way her pulse jumped when their fingers brushed. "You didn't have to." "Jake." Kyla's voice rang out from behind her, and suddenly the little girl was squeezing past Tanisha to throw her arms around Jake's waist. "You came. You really came." "Of course I came," Jake said, returning the enthusiastic hug. "I promised, didn't I? And I never break promises to my friends." "We're friends?" Kyla asked, looking up at him with shining eyes. "The best of friends," Jake confirmed solemnly. "Friends who help each other fix things." Tanisha felt something warm and complicated twist in her chest as she watched the interaction. Kyla had never been shy, but she'd also never attached herself to people this quickly. There was something about Jake that seemed to speak to her daughter's heart in a way that both thrilled and terrified Tanisha. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let Jake into the small living room. "I'll just put these in water." As she busied herself finding a vase in the kitchen, Tanisha could hear Kyla giving Jake a comprehensive tour of their home. "This is our living room, and that's the couch where Mommy and I read stories every night, and this is my toy box, but most of my cars are in my room because they need their own garage. This is a great house," Jake said when they joined Tanisha in the kitchen. "Very cozy." Tanisha looked around at the small space with fresh eyes, trying to see it as Jake might. The kitchen was barely large enough for 2 people, with outdated appliances and linoleum that had seen better days. But she'd worked hard to make it warm and welcoming, with cheerful yellow curtains at the windows and Kyla's artwork covering the refrigerator. "It's not much," she said, "but it's ours." "That's what makes it special," Jake said, and something in his tone made her look at him more closely. There was a wistfulness in his expression that spoke of someone who understood the value of having a place to belong. "Can I show Jake my room?" Kyla asked. "I want him to see my car collection." "After dinner," Tanisha promised. "Go wash your hands." As Kyla skipped off to the bathroom, Jake moved closer to where Tanisha was stirring the sauce. "Can I help with anything?" "You can sit down and relax," Tanisha said. "You're the guest." "I'm also someone who likes to be useful," Jake replied, rolling up his sleeves. "Put me to work." There was something so natural about having him in her kitchen, moving around her with an easy familiarity as if he'd been there dozens of times before. He found plates in the cabinet without asking, set the small table with careful precision, and somehow managed to stay out of her way while still being helpful. "So tell me about yourself," Jake said as they worked together. "Besides the fact that you make amazing spaghetti sauce and raise the most amazing little girl in the world, Tanisha felt heat rise in her cheeks. There's not much to tell. I work 2 jobs, I'm raising Kyla, and that pretty much takes up all my time. What kind of work do you do? Part-time at Chen's Market in the afternoons, and I clean offices at night after Kyla goes to bed. She didn't mention that Mrs. Patterson next door watched Kyla during her evening shift for free because she knew Tanisha couldn't afford a babysitter. That's a lot, Jake said quietly. When do you sleep? When I can, Tanisha said with a shrug that she hoped looked casual. It's worth it to be able to stay home with Kyla during the day. You're an amazing mother, Jake said, and the sincerity in his voice made her look up from the pasta she was draining. I do my best, she said. Some days that feels like enough and some days it feels like you're drowning? Jake suggested gently. Yeah, Tanisha admitted, surprised by his understanding. Exactly like that. I remember feeling that way when I first took over the shop, Jake said. Like every day was just about surviving until the next one. It gets easier. Does it? Tanisha asked, meaning more than just the work. It does, Jake said, his eyes meeting hers. Especially when you're not doing it alone. Before Tanisha could figure out how to respond to that loaded statement, Kyla bounded back into the kitchen with clean hands and fresh enthusiasm. Is it time to eat now? I'm starving. Jake, wait until you taste Mommy's spaghetti. It's the best in the whole world. Dinner was a revelation. Tanisha had grown so accustomed to quiet meals with just her and Kyla that she'd forgotten how different the energy could be with another person at the table. Jake listened to Kyla's stories with genuine interest, asked follow-up questions that made the little girl feel important, and somehow managed to eat while keeping up with her rapid-fire chatter. And then, Kyla was saying, gesturing with her fork, my red car beat 3 blue cars and a yellow truck in the race under the coffee table. It was epic. Epic is right, Jake agreed seriously. That red car of yours is clearly a champion. It is now that you fixed it, Kyla said. Before it was just broken. But you made it better, and now it's the fastest car in my whole collection. Sometimes things just need a little attention to reach their full potential, Jake said, and though he was still talking to Kyla, his eyes briefly met Tanisha's across the table. Like people? Kyla asked with the insight that sometimes surprised Tanisha. Exactly like people, Jake confirmed. After dinner, Kyla gave Jake the promised tour of her bedroom, showing off her extensive car collection with the pride of a museum curator. Tanisha leaned against the doorframe, watching Jake examine each toy with exaggerated seriousness, asking about their special features and racing histories. This one's my second favorite, Kyla said, holding up a purple convertible. But the red one you fixed is my first favorite now. What makes a car a favorite? Jake asked, settling cross-legged on the floor beside Kyla's toy garage. When someone cares enough to fix it when it's broken, Kyla said matter-of-factly. That's how you know it's special. Tanisha felt her throat tighten at her daughter's simple wisdom. How many times had she wished for someone to care enough to fix the broken things in their lives? Not just the car or the leaky faucet or the loose step on the front porch, but the loneliness, the exhaustion, the feeling that she was carrying everything alone. Jake, Kyla said, arranging her cars in careful formation, can I ask you something? Always, Jake said. Do you get lonely? The question hung in the air, innocent and devastating. Tanisha started to intervene to redirect the conversation, but Jake held up a gentle hand. Sometimes, he said honestly. Do you? Sometimes, Kyla echoed. Especially when Mommy has to work at night and Mrs. Patterson comes over. She's nice but she's not Mommy. And she's not. Kyla trailed off, seeming to search for words. She's not family, Jake supplied gently. Yeah, Kyla said brightening. She's not family. Do you have family, Jake? Not the kind you're born with, Jake said carefully. But I have friends who feel like family. And sometimes that's even better because you get to choose them. Did you choose us? Kyla asked with devastating directness. Jake's eyes found Tanisha's over Kyla's head, and she saw something profound and honest in his expression. Yeah, he said quietly. I think I did. Later, after Kyla had been tucked into bed with promises that Jake would come back soon, Tanisha and Jake sat on the front porch swing, sharing a cup of coffee and listening to the evening sounds of the neighborhood. The sun had set, leaving the sky painted in soft shades of purple and gold, and the air was warm and thick with the promise of summer. Thank you for tonight, Jake said, his voice quiet in the growing darkness. I can't remember the last time I enjoyed an evening this much. Thank you for being so good with Kyla, Tanisha replied. She doesn't usually take to people this quickly. She's an amazing kid, Jake said. Smart, funny, honest. You should be proud. I am, Tanisha said, then found herself adding, but sometimes I worry that I'm not enough for her. That she needs more than what I can give her. Like what? Tanisha was quiet for a long moment, watching fireflies begin to flicker in the yard. Stability. A father figure. The kind of childhood where she doesn't have to worry about whether we can afford things or whether mommy is too tired to play. Can I tell you something? Jake said gently. I spent my childhood in homes with 2 parents, plenty of money, all the stability anyone could want. And none of it mattered because there wasn't any love. What you and Kyla have, that bond, that joy in each other's company, that's worth more than all the stability in the world. You really think so? I know so, Jake said firmly. That little girl in there is loved completely and unconditionally. She knows she's the center of your universe. Trust me, that's the foundation for everything else. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the gentle creak of the porch swing mixing with the distant sounds of evening, dogs barking, televisions murmuring through open windows, the occasional car passing on the quiet street. Can I ask you something? Tanisha said finally. Anything. Why are you being so kind to us? You don't even know us. Jake was quiet for so long that Tanisha wondered if she'd overstepped. Then he spoke, his voice soft and thoughtful. Maybe because I know what it's like to feel alone, he said. And maybe because when Kyla asked me to fix her broken family, something in me recognized something in you both. Like we were all missing pieces of the same puzzle. Tanisha felt tears prick at her eyes. We're not your responsibility, Jake. No, he agreed. But maybe that's what makes it mean something. Maybe the best kind of family is the one you choose, not the one you're born into. As the evening wound down and Jake prepared to leave, Kyla appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, clearly having snuck out of bed. Jake, she called softly, will you come back tomorrow? Kyla Elizabeth, Tanisha warned, but Jake was already walking toward the porch. I can't come tomorrow, he said, crouching down to Kyla's level. But how about this weekend? Maybe we could all go somewhere fun together. Like where? Kyla asked, bouncing on her toes. Well, Jake said, glancing at Tanisha for permission, there's a classic car show at the fairgrounds on Saturday. Lots of beautiful old cars to look at. Think you might be interested? Yes. Kyla squealed, then quickly lowered her voice. I mean, yes please. If mommy says it's okay. All eyes turned to Tanisha, and she found herself nodding before she could overthink it. That sounds fun. Great, Jake said, standing and ruffling Kyla's curls. It's a date then. Now get back to bed before your mom grounds us both. As Jake walked to his truck, Tanisha stood on the porch with Kyla beside her, watching his taillights disappear into the night. The evening had been perfect in a way she hadn't dared to hope for, natural and easy and filled with laughter. I like him, mommy, Kyla said sleepily, leaning against Tanisha's side. I like him too, baby, Tanisha admitted. Do you think he could be the missing piece? Kyla asked with the directness that never failed to catch Tanisha off guard. Tanisha looked down at her daughter's hopeful face and felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. Maybe, she whispered. Maybe he could be. As they went back inside, Tanisha caught sight of the yellow daisies Jake had brought, now arranged in a vase on the kitchen counter. They brightened the whole room, bringing color and life to spaces that had felt empty for so long. For the first time in years, Tanisha allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to let someone in, to trust someone with her heart and her daughter's happiness. It was terrifying and thrilling and completely unknown. But as she tucked Kyla back into bed and listened to her excited chatter about the car show, Tanisha found herself looking forward to Saturday with an anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Maybe good men really did still exist. And maybe, just maybe, one of them was interested in helping to fix the things that were broken in their small, imperfect, but incredibly precious family. The classic car show had been everything Kyla could have dreamed and more. For 3 hours, she'd raced between gleaming vintage automobiles, asking their owners endless questions while Jake patiently translated technical answers into 6-year-old language. Tanisha had found herself relaxing, enjoying the sight of her daughter's joy and the easy way Jake seemed to fit into their little family unit. But now, 3 days later, as she stood in the break room at Chen's Market staring at her phone, doubt was creeping in like fog rolling in from the ocean. You look like someone who's gotten some good news and doesn't know what to do with it, Mrs. Chen observed, setting down her cup of tea and studying Tanisha's face. Tanisha looked down at the text message that had arrived 20 minutes ago. Hope you and Kyla had as much fun at the car show as I did. Would love to take you both to dinner Friday if you're free. Somewhere nice where Kyla can get a kid's menu and you can relax. Let me know. Jake. It's nothing, Tanisha said, sliding the phone into her apron pocket. Just someone asking about plans for the weekend. Someone, Mrs. Chin repeated with a knowing smile. Would this someone happen to be the mechanic who fixed your daughter's toy? How did you? Small neighborhood, Mrs. Chin said with a shrug. And Mrs. Patterson mentioned that Kyla hasn't stopped talking about Jake the car fixer, who came to dinner and took you to look at old cars. Tanisha groaned. She'd forgotten how quickly news traveled in their tight-knit community. It's not a big deal. He's just being friendly. Friendly enough to spend his Saturday afternoon looking at cars with a 6-year-old? He likes cars, Tanisha said weakly. He likes you, Mrs. Chin corrected gently. And unless I'm very much mistaken, you like him too. So what's the problem? Tanisha was quiet for a long moment, arranging and rearranging the supplies on the break room counter. What if I'm making a mistake? She said finally. What if I'm letting him get close and he hurts Kyla? She's already so attached to him. What if he doesn't? Mrs. Chin countered. What if he's exactly what he seems to be, a good man who cares about you both? But how can I know for sure? Tanisha's voice was small, vulnerable. Kyla's father seemed wonderful at first too. He said all the right things, made all the right promises. And then when things got real, when I got pregnant and needed him to step up. He left, Mrs. Chin finished gently. He left, Tanisha confirmed, the old hurt still sharp even after all these years. Didn't even wait for Kyla to be born. Just packed up and disappeared, and I never heard from him again. Mrs. Chin reached across the small table and covered Tanisha's hand with her own weathered one. That man was a coward. But one man's cowardice doesn't mean all men are cowards. But what if I can't tell the difference? Tanisha asked. What if my judgment is just fundamentally flawed? I thought I knew Brandon. I thought I could trust him. What if I'm wrong about Jake too? Have you considered that maybe you're not wrong? Mrs. Chin asked. That maybe your instincts are better than you think and you're just afraid to trust them? Tanisha's phone buzzed again. Another text from Jake. No pressure at all. Just thought it might be fun. Hope you're having a good day at work. The consideration in that second message, the way he seemed to sense that she might need space to think, the gentleness of his approach, made her chest tighten with conflicting emotions. He's different, she admitted quietly. From Brandon, I mean. He's patient with Kyla in a way that seems so natural. And he looks at me like I'm worth something. Because you are worth something, Mrs. Chin said firmly. You're worth everything. But more importantly, what does your heart tell you about him? Tanisha closed her eyes, thinking about the way Jake had spent 45 minutes patiently explaining carburetors to Kyla at the car show. The way he'd insisted on paying for their lunch despite her protests. The way he'd walked them to their car afterward and made sure they were safely buckled in before leaving himself. My heart says he's good, she whispered. My heart says he could be the answer to prayers I was afraid to pray. Then maybe you should listen to your heart. But what if my heart is wrong? What if I let him in and he leaves? I can handle being hurt, but I can't handle watching Kyla go through that. She's already asking if Jake can come to her school performance next week, and when we can go on another adventure together. She's building him into her life like he's going to stay forever. Mrs. Chun was quiet for a moment, her wise eyes studying Tanisha's face. Can I tell you something about my husband? About how we met? Tanisha nodded. I was 19 working in my family's restaurant. He came in one day for lunch. This young man with kind eyes and gentle hands who was so polite to my father, so respectful to my mother. But I was terrified of him. Why? Because my older sister had married young and her husband turned out to be cruel. He seemed wonderful before the wedding, but after, he became someone else entirely. So when this sweet boy started coming to the restaurant every day asking about me, bringing me small gifts, I was so afraid that I almost sent him away. What changed your mind? Mrs. Chin smiled, her eyes distant with memory. My grandmother. She watched him for weeks, the way he treated everyone from the bus boy to the other customers. She watched how he never lost his temper, never spoke harshly, never demanded anything he hadn't earned. And finally she said to me, "Child, fear is not the same as wisdom. Sometimes the greatest risk is not taking one at all." Did you regret it? Taking the risk? Never, Mrs. Chin said firmly. Not for a single day in 37 years. But more than that, I learned that you can't protect yourself or your children from all possible hurt. What you can do is teach them to recognize goodness when they see it, and to be brave enough to reach for it. Tanisha felt tears prick at her eyes. What if I'm not brave enough? You've been brave enough to raise a beautiful daughter on your own, Mrs. Chen pointed out. You've been brave enough to work 2 jobs and still make time for bedtime stories and Saturday adventures. You've been brave enough to survive everything life has thrown at you so far. Don't tell me you're not brave enough for love. That evening, after Kyla was in bed, Tanisha sat on her front porch with her phone in her hands, Jake's messages still unanswered. The rational part of her brain was cataloging all the reasons to be cautious. She barely knew him, Kyla was getting too attached too quickly, she couldn't afford to trust her judgment when it came to men. But the irrational part, the part that remembered how Jake's eyes had lit up when Kyla explained the difference between race cars and regular cars, the part that noticed how he always made sure Tanisha felt included in conversations, the part that had felt something spark to life when he'd accidentally brushed her hand while reaching for the sugar at dinner, that part was begging her to take the chance. Her phone rang and Jake's name appeared on the screen. Tanisha stared at it for 3 rings before finally answering. "Hi," she said, her voice slightly breathless. "Hi yourself," Jake's warm voice came through the speaker. "I hope I'm not calling too late. I just wanted to check in, see how your day went." "It was fine," Tanisha said, then found herself adding, "long but fine. I got the feeling from your silence that maybe I was being too pushy with the dinner invitation," Jake said. "I want you to know there's no pressure at all. I just enjoy spending time with you and Kyla, and I thought it might be fun." The consideration in his voice, the way he seemed genuinely concerned about her comfort level, made something inside Tanisha's chest loosen slightly. "It's not that," she said quietly. "It's just, this is all new territory for me." "Dating?" Jake asked gently. "Trusting someone with my daughter's heart," Tanisha corrected. "She talks about you constantly, Jake. You've become this huge presence in her life after just a few meetings, and that scares me." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Can I ask what scares you about it specifically?" Tanisha took a deep breath. Her father left before she was born. Just vanished one day when the reality of having a family got too real for him. And Kyla doesn't know the details, but she knows there's something missing. When she asks about her daddy, I don't have any good answers for her. "I'm not him," Jake said quietly. "I know that," Tanisha said quickly. "Logically, I know that. But emotionally I'm terrified of letting either of us get attached to someone who might decide we're too much work." "Tanisha," Jake said, his voice gentle but firm, "can I tell you something? When Kyla asked me to fix her broken family, it wasn't just heartbreaking. It was revealing. Because she wasn't asking for money or things or even stability. She was asking for someone to care enough to try. And when I look at you too, when I see how you've built this beautiful life together despite everything you've been through, I don't see too much work. I see 2 people worth fighting for." Tanisha felt tears slip down her cheeks. "How do I know you mean that?" "Because I keep showing up," Jake said simply. "Because I want to know about Kyla's day and whether your car is running well and if you remembered to eat lunch. Because when I'm not with you both, I'm thinking about when I will be again." "This is terrifying," Tanisha whispered. "I know," Jake said. "For me too. I've spent most of my adult life convinced I wasn't cut out for family, that I wouldn't know how to be what someone needed. But being around you and Kyla, it makes me want to try. It makes me want to be better." They talked for another hour about fears and hopes and the delicate balance of protecting your heart while still being open to love. By the time they hung up, Tanisha felt something shifting inside her, walls she'd spent years building beginning to develop cracks. The next morning she sent Jake a text. "Dinner Friday sounds wonderful. Kyla will be over the moon. Thank you for being patient with my fears." His response came back immediately, "Thank you for trusting me with them. Can't wait for Friday." As Tanisha got ready for work, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and was surprised to see something she hadn't seen in years. Hope. Real, honest, terrifying hope that maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time she was brave enough to let someone in. Maybe Mrs. Chen was right, and the greatest risk really was not taking one at all. Kyla Williams had a plan. It had been developing in her 6-year-old mind for days, ever since the dinner at Chez Philippe where Jake had made her feel like a princess and made her mommy laugh more than she had in months. The plan was simple in the way that only children's plans could be. Get Jake and mommy to fall in love so they could be a real family. She'd been watching them carefully, the way they looked at each other when they thought she wasn't paying attention, the way Jake always made sure mommy felt special, the way mommy's voice got soft and happy when she talked about Jake. They were already halfway there, Kyla was sure of it. They just needed a little help. "Mrs. Patterson," Kyla said as the elderly woman walked her home from the bus stop, "can boys and girls be best friends?" "Of course they can, sweetheart," Mrs. Patterson replied, shifting her purse to her other arm. Why do you ask? Because Jake is my best friend, but he's also Mommy's best friend, and I want to make sure that's okay. Mrs. Patterson smiled. I think that sounds perfectly wonderful. Your Jake seems like a very nice young man. He's not my Jake yet, Kyla said seriously. But I'm working on it. The first part of Kyla's plan went into action that very afternoon. When Tanisha arrived home from her morning shift at the market, she found her daughter sitting at the kitchen table with crayons and construction paper scattered around her. What are you making, baby? Tanisha asked, dropping a kiss on top of Kyla's curls. An invitation, Kyla announced proudly, holding up a piece of purple paper decorated with wobbly flowers and hearts. For Jake to come to my school performance next Friday. Tanisha felt her stomach flutter with nerves. Sweetie, we can't just invite Jake to everything we do. He has his own life, his own plans. But it's family night, Kyla protested. All the other kids' families will be there. And Jake is practically family, isn't he? Kyla? Please, Mommy? I already wrote it and everything. Look. Kyla held up the invitation, which read in her careful first-grade handwriting, Dear Jake, please come see me sing at school. It's Friday at 7. Love, Kyla, and Mommy too. Tanisha stared at the invitation, torn between admiration for her daughter's initiative and panic at the presumption. Baby, you can't just assume that Mommy wants to invite Jake places. But you do want to, don't you? Kyla asked with devastating 6-year-old logic. You smile different when you talk about him. Like the way you smile when we have ice cream for breakfast on snow days. Before Tanisha could formulate a response, Kyla was already sealing the invitation in an envelope she decorated with more flowers and hearts. I'm going to give it to him tomorrow when we go to get the car's check-up, Kyla announced. Unless you want to call him and invite him yourself? Tanisha found herself caught between her daughter's hopeful face and her own conflicted feelings. The truth was she did want Jake at Kyla's performance. She wanted to share that moment of pride with someone who would understand how special it was. But she also didn't want to seem presumptuous or pushy. We'll see, she said finally, which in mom speak meant maybe but probably yes. The next day at Thompson's Auto Repair, Kyla put the second phase of her plan into action. While Jake was checking the fluid levels in their car and Tanisha was distracted by a phone call from work, Kyla sidled up to him with her invitation hidden behind her back. Jake, she whispered conspiratorially, I have something for you, but it's a secret until Mommy gets off the phone. A secret, huh? Jake said, crouching down to her level. I love secrets. It's an invitation, Kyla said, producing the decorated envelope with a flourish. For my school performance. All the kids' families come and I want you to be there because you're... She paused, considering her words carefully, because you're important to us. Jake accepted the invitation with the same seriousness he might give to a formal wedding announcement. This is beautiful, Kyla. You did an amazing job decorating it. Will you come? Kyla asked, bouncing slightly on her toes. I'm singing a solo and everything. It's about families and how they come in all different shapes and sizes. I would be honored to come, Jake said, and the sincerity in his voice made Kyla's heart soar. But what does your mommy think about inviting me? She wants you there, Kyla said confidently. She just gets nervous about asking for things sometimes. Mommy doesn't like to bother people. Jake glanced over at Tanisha, who was still on the phone but clearly trying to wrap up the conversation. Your mommy never bothers me, Kyla. I hope you know that. I know, Kyla said sagely. But sometimes grown-ups need help figuring out what they want. That's why kids have to help sometimes. When Tanisha finished her call and turned back to them, she found Jake and Kyla in what appeared to be a serious conversation. Everything okay over here? Kyla gave me an invitation to her school performance, Jake said, holding up the envelope. I told her I'd be honored to attend if that's okay with you. Tanisha felt heat rise in her cheeks. Kyla Elizabeth, did you invite Jake without asking me first? I asked you yesterday, Kyla protested. You said we'll see and then you didn't say no, so I figured that meant yes. Jake bit back a smile at the little girl's logic. If it's a problem, I completely understand. It's not a problem, Tanisha said quickly, then felt her cheeks grow even warmer. I mean, if you want to come, you're welcome. But don't feel obligated. I want to come, Jake said, his eyes meeting hers. I wouldn't miss it. Phase 3 of Kyla's plan went into effect the following Tuesday. She had noticed that while Jake and her mommy clearly enjoyed each other's company, they were both too polite, too careful about not imposing. They needed more opportunities to spend time together, and they needed those opportunities to feel natural and inevitable. "Mommy," Kyla said over breakfast, "my tummy hurts." Tanisha immediately shifted into mother mode, feeling Kyla's forehead and checking for fever. "What kind of hurt, baby? Sharp or achy?" "Achy," Kyla said, which was technically true. Her tummy did hurt, but only because she felt bad about lying. "Like I ate too much candy, but I didn't eat any candy." "Maybe you're coming down with something," Tanisha said worriedly. "I should call Mrs. Chen and tell her I can't come in today." "No," Kyla said quickly, then caught herself. "I mean, maybe I just need to rest a little. Mrs. Patterson could watch me like always." But Mrs. Patterson, as it turned out, was visiting her sister in the next town and wouldn't be back until evening. And Mrs. Chen was short-staffed and really needed Tanisha to come in, even if just for a few hours. "I don't know what to do," Tanisha said, pacing the kitchen while Kyla watched from the table. "I can't leave you alone when you're not feeling well, but I can't miss work either." "What about Jake?" Kyla suggested innocently. "He's good at taking care of people. Remember how he fixed my car so gently?" Tanisha stopped pacing. "Kyla, I can't ask Jake to babysit you. That's too much. Why don't you call him and see what he says?" Kyla suggested. "Maybe he wouldn't mind. Maybe he'd like to spend time with me." Tanisha was torn. She really couldn't afford to miss work, and Kyla did seem under the weather. Maybe Jake wouldn't mind helping out just this once. 20 minutes later, Jake was knocking on their front door with a concerned expression and a bag from the pharmacy. "How's our patient doing?" he asked, setting the bag on the counter and immediately going to feel Kyla's forehead. "Better now that you're here," Kyla said with perfect honesty. She did feel better, lighter, happier, like the missing piece of their family puzzle had clicked into place. "I brought some children's Tylenol just in case and some of that electrolyte drink kids are supposed to have when they're sick," Jake said. "And maybe some coloring books to help pass the time." "You didn't have to do all that," Tanisha protested, but Jake waved off her objections. "I wanted to help," he said simply. "Go to work. Kyla and I will be fine. We'll watch movies and color pictures and maybe build a blanket fort if she's feeling up to it." As Tanisha gathered her things for work, she felt a strange emotion she couldn't quite name. It was relief, certainly, but also something deeper. It was the feeling of having someone to share the load, someone who cared enough about Kyla to drop everything and help without being asked twice. "Thank you," she said to Jake, and he could hear the depth of gratitude in those simple words. "Anytime," he replied and meant it completely. After Tanisha left, Kyla waited exactly 10 minutes before making a remarkable recovery. "Jake," she said, sitting up from her nest of blankets on the couch, "I feel much better now. Maybe we could make cookies for when Mommy gets home." Jake studied her suspiciously. "That was a pretty quick recovery." "Sometimes rest is all you need," Kyla said innocently. "Besides, Mommy loves chocolate chip cookies and she's been working really hard lately. Don't you think she deserves a surprise?" Jake had the distinct feeling he was being manipulated by a 6-year-old mastermind, but he found he didn't mind at all. "I think your mommy deserves all the surprises in the world," he said. "But first, are you going to tell me what this is really about?" Kyla considered her options carefully. Jake was smart and he was kind and he obviously cared about both her and her mommy. Maybe it was time to let him in on the plan. "I want you to be part of our family," she said with characteristic directness. "Not just visiting sometimes, but really part of it. Like, living here and having breakfast with us and reading me bedtime stories and making Mommy laugh every day." Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. "Kyla? I know you like us," Kyla continued matter-of-factly. "And I know Mommy likes you even though she gets nervous about it sometimes. So I thought maybe if you spent more time together, you'd figure out that you belong with us." "Is that what all this has been about?" Jake asked gently. "The invitation, the sick day that turned into a baking session?" "Maybe," Kyla admitted. "Are you mad?" Jake looked at this remarkable little girl who had somehow decided he was worthy of being part of her family, and felt his heart do something it had never done before. It settled, like a bird finding its nest after a long migration. "I'm not mad," he said quietly. "But Kyla, things like this, becoming a family, it's more complicated than just wanting it to happen." "Why?" Kyla asked with the beautiful simplicity of childhood. "Because your mommy has to want it too and she has to feel safe about it, and there are lots of grown-up things that have to be figured out." "But you want it too, don't you?" Kyla pressed. "You want to be our family?" Jake looked into her hopeful brown eyes and knew he couldn't lie. "Yeah," he said softly. "I want it more than I've ever wanted anything." "Then we just have to be patient and let Mommy figure it out," Kyla said sagely. She's really smart, but she worries a lot about making mistakes. We just have to show her that you're not a mistake." As they measured flour and sugar for cookies, Jake marveled at the wisdom of this little girl who had somehow appointed herself the architect of their happiness. She was right about one thing: Tanisha was cautious, careful with her heart and her daughter's future. But she was also warm and loving, and everything Jake had never known he was searching for. When Tanisha came home to the smell of fresh-baked cookies and the sound of laughter from the kitchen, she found Jake and Kyla covered in flour and grinning like conspirators. "Feeling better, I see," she said to Kyla with amused suspicion. "Much better," Kyla agreed cheerfully. "Jake is very good medicine." Later, after Kyla was in bed and Jake was preparing to leave, Tanisha walked him to his truck. "Thank you for today," she said. "I know Kyla wasn't really sick, and I know you probably figured that out pretty quickly." "She's a smart kid," Jake said with a smile. "And she's got her heart set on some pretty big dreams." "I'm sorry if she put you in an awkward position," Tanisha said. "She means well, but she doesn't understand that relationships are complicated." "Maybe they don't have to be as complicated as we make them," Jake said gently. "Maybe sometimes a 6-year-old's perspective is exactly what we need." As Jake drove away, Tanisha stood in her driveway thinking about his words. Inside, Kyla was probably already planning her next matchmaking scheme, convinced that she could orchestrate a happy ending through sheer force of will and childhood optimism. And maybe, Tanisha thought with a smile, she could. The morning of Kyla's school performance dawned gray and drizzly, matching Tanisha's suddenly uncertain mood. She'd woken up with an inexplicable sense of dread, the kind that settles in your stomach like a stone and refuses to be dislodged by coffee or rational thinking. "Mommy, are you excited?" Kyla asked over breakfast, practically vibrating with anticipation. "Jake's going to hear me sing, and all my friends are going to meet him, and Mrs. Rodriguez said families can take pictures afterward." "I'm excited, baby," Tanisha said, forcing brightness into her voice. "You're going to do amazing." But as the day wore on, the dread only intensified. It crystallized into actual worry when she overheard a conversation between two other mothers while picking Kyla up from school. "Did you see that new mechanic shop opened up on 5th Street? One of them was saying. "Thompson's Auto Repair or something like that?" "Oh yeah, my neighbor goes there," the other replied. She said the owner seemed nice enough, but there was something about him that made her uncomfortable. Like he was trying too hard to be charming, you know? She said she got weird vibes. "Really? That's too bad. We need good mechanics in this neighborhood." "Well, you know how it is with single guys who own their own businesses. Sometimes there's a reason they're still single at 30-something. Tanisha felt ice form in her veins. They were talking about Jake. It had to be. How many Thompson's auto repair shops could there be in their small city? And if other people were getting weird vibes from him, what did that say about her judgment? All afternoon, doubt gnawed at her. She found herself replaying every interaction she'd had with Jake, looking for red flags she might have missed. His kindness to Kyla? Was it genuine, or was he trying to get to Tanisha through her daughter? His patience with their financial limitations? Was it real compassion or manipulation? His willingness to help out when Kyla was sick? Was it because he cared or because he was trying to insinuate himself into their lives? By evening, Tanisha had worked herself into a state of barely controlled panic. She applied her makeup with shaking hands and helped Kyla into her performance dress. A white blouse and navy skirt with a red bow tie that made her look impossibly grown up and beautiful. "Do I look pretty?" Kyla asked, twirling in front of the mirror. "You look perfect," Tanisha said, meaning it completely. "Like an angel." "I can't wait for Jake to see me," Kyla said happily. "Do you think he'll be proud?" Tanisha's throat tightened. "Baby, you know that Jake might not be able to make it tonight, right? Sometimes adults have work obligations or other plans." "But he promised," Kyla said with the absolute faith of childhood. "Jake never breaks promises." They arrived at Roosevelt Elementary 20 minutes before the performance was scheduled to begin. The multipurpose room was filling up with families, grandparents, and excited children in their performance outfits. Tanisha scanned the crowd, part of her hoping to see Jake's familiar figure and part of her hoping he wouldn't show up so she wouldn't have to figure out how to handle her swirling doubts. Mrs. Williams. Kyla's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, approached with a warm smile. "Kyla has been so excited about tonight. She mentioned that a special friend of yours would be coming?" "We'll see," Tanisha said noncommittally. Sometimes plans change. But 15 minutes later, just as the first graders were lining up on stage, Jake appeared in the doorway. He was dressed in dark slacks and a button-down shirt, his hair neatly combed, and he carried a small bouquet of yellow daisies, Kyla's favorite. Several other parents turned to look at him, and Tanisha caught a few curious glances in her direction. Jake. Kyla spotted him immediately and waved enthusiastically from the stage, causing several other children to turn and wave at him too. Jake waved back with a grin that made Tanisha's heart skip despite her reservations. He made his way through the crowd to where Tanisha was sitting, and she noticed how some of the other parents watched his progress with interest. Did they recognize him from the neighborhood gossip? Were they judging her for bringing him here? Sorry I'm almost late, Jake said, settling into the folding chair beside her. I got caught up at the shop and had to rush home to change. You didn't have to dress up, Tanisha said, acutely aware of how good he looked and how several other mothers were sneaking glances at him. For Kyla's big night? Of course I did, Jake said, his attention immediately focusing on the stage where the children were beginning their first song. For the next 45 minutes, Tanisha tried to enjoy her daughter's performance, but she found herself distracted by Jake's presence beside her. He was completely absorbed in watching Kyla, his face lighting up with pride during her solo, his hands moving to applaud at all the right moments. When Kyla sang her song about families coming in all shapes and sizes, Jake reached over and briefly squeezed Tanisha's hand, a gesture so natural and supportive that it made her eyes fill with tears. But then she caught sight of Mrs. Henderson from down the street whispering to another woman while looking pointedly in their direction, and all her doubts came rushing back. After the performance, as families gathered to take pictures and congratulate the young performers, Kyla bounded over to them with her face glowing with excitement. Did you hear me sing? She asked Jake, throwing her arms around his waist. Did I do good? You were absolutely perfect, Jake said, kneeling down to her level and presenting her with the bouquet. I'm so proud of you, kiddo. Can we take pictures? Kyla asked. I want to show everyone that my family came to see me sing. As other parents began snapping photos of their children, Jake pulled out his phone. How about a family picture? He suggested. The word family hit Tanisha like a physical blow. They weren't a family. They were a single mother and her daughter and a man they barely knew, no matter how kind he seemed. What was she doing letting Kyla get so attached? What was she doing letting herself believe in fairy tales? I should probably get Kyla home, she said abruptly, standing and gathering her purse. It's past her bedtime. Jake looked confused by the sudden change in her demeanor. Are you okay? You seem upset about something. I'm fine, Tanisha said, but her voice was tight and false. We just need to go. But Mommy, Kyla protested, we didn't take pictures yet. And Mrs. Rodriguez wanted to meet Jake. Another time, baby, Tanisha said, taking Kyla's hand with perhaps more firmness than necessary. Say goodbye to Jake. Kyla's face fell. But he just got here. Can't we go get ice cream or something? To celebrate? Not tonight, Tanisha said, avoiding Jake's increasingly worried gaze. The drive home was quiet except for Kyla's disappointed sighs from the back seat. When they pulled into their driveway, Jake's truck was already there, and he was leaning against the hood waiting for them. Tanisha, he said as they got out of the car, what's going on? Did I do something wrong? Kyla, go inside and get ready for bed, Tanisha said, not answering Jake's question. But I want to talk to Jake, Kyla protested. Now Kyla. The little girl looked between the two adults, sensing the tension she didn't understand, and reluctantly went inside. What happened back there? Jake asked once they were alone. Everything was fine, and then suddenly you couldn't get away from me fast enough. Tanisha crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive gesture she didn't even realize she was making. I think maybe we've been moving too fast, she said. Getting too comfortable with arrangements that don't make sense. What arrangements? Jake asked, genuinely confused. Tanisha, I thought we were building something real here. I thought you felt it too. That's the problem, Tanisha said, her voice rising slightly. Kyla is calling you family. She's planning a future that includes you in it permanently. And I'm letting her because I'm too caught up in my own wishful thinking to protect her. Protect her from what? Jake asked, hurt evident in his voice. From getting attached to someone who's going to disappear when things get too real or too complicated, Tanisha shot back. From believing in happy endings that don't exist for people like us. Jake stepped back as if she'd slapped him. People like you? What does that mean? Single mothers with baggage and no money and complicated lives, Tanisha said, the words tumbling out along with all her fears and insecurities. People who can't afford to take risks with their children's hearts. So that's what you think I am? Jake asked quietly. A risk to your daughter's heart? I don't know what you are, Tanisha said desperately. That's the problem. I've known you for a few weeks and already Kyla thinks you're going to be her father figure. Already I'm depending on you in ways that scare me. What happens when you get tired of playing house? What happens when you meet someone without complications who can give you a real relationship? This is a real relationship, Jake said, his voice firm despite the hurt in his eyes. At least I thought it was. And I'm not playing house, Tanisha. I'm trying to build a life with you. You don't even know me, Tanisha said, but her voice was losing its conviction. I know that you work 2 jobs to give Kyla everything she needs. I know that you read her 3 stories every night even when you're exhausted. I know that you've been hurt before and you're scared of being hurt again. I know that when you smile, really smile, it's like the sun coming out. I know that you're the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever met, and I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Tanisha felt tears slip down her cheeks, but she couldn't tell if they were from fear or longing or some combination of both. Don't, she whispered. Please don't say things like that. Why? Because they're true? Because I can't handle them being true, Tanisha said, her voice breaking. Because I can't handle believing in them and then losing them. Jake took a step toward her, then stopped when she stepped back. Tanisha, I'm not him. I'm not the man who left you. I'm not going anywhere. You don't know that, Tanisha said. People make promises they can't keep all the time. They mean them when they say them, but then life gets complicated and priorities change and sometimes people mean exactly what they say and stick around to prove it, Jake finished. Sometimes people find something worth fighting for and they don't let it go. I can't, Tanisha said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I can't take that chance. Not with Kyla's happiness at stake. Jake stood quietly for a long moment, his hands clenched at his sides. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled but strained. I understand that you're scared, he said. I understand that you've been hurt and you want to protect Kyla. But what you're doing right now, pushing away someone who cares about you both, that's not protection. That's just fear. Maybe fear is all I can afford right now, Tanisha said. Jake nodded slowly and she could see him pulling back, putting distance between them even though he hadn't moved. If that's really how you feel, he said quietly, then I'll respect that. I won't push. But Tanisha, don't let fear make you throw away something that could be beautiful just because it might not last forever. Nothing lasts forever, but that doesn't mean it's not worth having. He walked back to his truck, pausing with his hand on the door handle. Tell Kyla she was amazing tonight, he said. And tell her I'm proud to know her. As Jake drove away, Tanisha stood in her driveway feeling like she just made the biggest mistake of her life. Inside, she could hear Kyla calling for her, probably wanting to relive every moment of her performance and share her excitement about Jake being there. How was she going to explain to her daughter that the man who had become so important to both of them might not be coming around anymore? How was she going to explain something she didn't understand herself? But as she walked toward the house, Tanisha told herself she'd done the right thing. She'd protected them both from potential heartbreak. She'd been smart and cautious and practical. So why did it feel like she'd just broken her own heart instead of protecting it? The silence in the house was deafening. 3 days had passed since Jake's truck had disappeared into the night, and the absence of his presence felt like a missing heartbeat. Kyla had asked about him exactly 17 times, Tanisha had been counting, and each inquiry was a fresh stab of guilt and regret. When is Jake coming back? Kyla asked over breakfast Monday morning, pushing her cereal around in the bowl without eating it. I don't know, baby, Tanisha said, which was the truth but felt like a lie. Did we do something wrong? Kyla's voice was small, uncertain in a way that made Tanisha's chest ache. No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Then why won't he visit us anymore? Tanisha set down her coffee cup with hands that weren't quite steady. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings that are hard to explain. But I miss him, Kyla said, and the simple honesty of it nearly broke Tanisha's heart. I miss him a lot. I know you do, Tanisha whispered because she missed him too with an intensity that surprised her. She missed his gentle laugh, his patient way of explaining things to Kyla, the way he looked at both of them like they were precious and worth protecting. That afternoon, while Kyla was at school, Tanisha found herself driving past Thompson's auto repair. She told herself she was just taking a different route to the market, but she slowed down as she passed the familiar bay doors. Jake's truck was parked in its usual spot, and she caught a glimpse of him working under the hood of a sedan, his movements as competent and graceful as always. For a moment she considered stopping. She could apologize, explain about her fears, Ask him to give them another chance. But then she remembered the hurt in his eyes that night, the way he'd said, "That's just fear," like it was something shameful instead of a reasonable response to past trauma. She drove on. Tuesday brought Rain and Kyla's first real meltdown since Jake had disappeared from their lives. "I don't want to go to school," Kyla announced, standing in the living room in her pajamas while her school clothes lay forgotten on the couch. "You have to go to school, baby," Tanisha said, glancing at the clock. They were already running late and she couldn't afford to be late for work again. "I don't want to," Kyla said, and suddenly she was crying, big tears rolling down her cheeks. "I want Jake to come back. I want him to fix things like he always does." "Kyla, please," Tanisha said, her own emotions too close to the surface. "Get dressed. We're going to be late." "I don't care," Kyla shouted, throwing herself onto the couch. "I don't care about school or being late or anything. I just want Jake." Tanisha stared at her daughter, at the tears and the genuine anguish, and felt like the worst mother in the world. In trying to protect Kyla from potential heartbreak, she'd caused actual heartbreak instead. They were both 20 minutes late that morning, Kyla to school and Tanisha to work. Mrs. Chin took one look at Tanisha's red-rimmed eyes and puffy face and sent her to the back office with a cup of tea and a knowing expression. "Want to talk about it?" Mrs. Chin asked gently. "I think I made a mistake," Tanisha said, staring into her tea. "A really big mistake." "With the mechanic?" Tanisha nodded. "I got scared and pushed him away. And now Kyla is heartbroken, and I feel like I've ruined everything for no good reason." "Fear is a reason," Mrs. Chin said carefully. "Not always a good one, but a reason nonetheless. The question is, what are you going to do about it now?" "I don't know if I can fix it," Tanisha admitted. "I said some pretty hurtful things. Made it clear that I didn't trust him, that I thought he was temporary." "Is that what you really believe?" Tanisha was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Jake's hands as he'd worked on Kyla's toy car, about the way he'd dropped everything to babysit when she was in a bind, about the pride in his voice when he'd watched Kyla sing. "No," she said finally. "I think I was just scared because what I really believe is that he's exactly what we've been missing. And that terrified me." "Then maybe you should tell him that." Wednesday morning brought a crisis that put everything else into perspective. Kyla woke up with a fever of 102 and a cough that sounded like it came from deep in her chest. Tanisha called in sick to both her jobs and spent the day alternating between cool washcloths and pediatric fever reducer, watching her daughter sleep fitfully and worry gnawing at her stomach. By evening, Kyla's fever had spiked to 104, and her breathing was becoming labored. Tanisha called their pediatrician, who told her to bring Kyla to the emergency room immediately. The drive to the hospital was the longest 20 minutes of Tanisha's life. Kyla was barely conscious, her small body burning with fever, and Tanisha found herself making bargains with God and the universe and anyone else who might be listening. In the emergency room waiting area, while Kyla was being examined and tested, Tanisha sat alone with her phone in her hands. Mrs. Patterson was out of town. Mrs. Chun was dealing with her own family emergency. Her sister lived 3 states away. Almost without conscious thought, she found herself scrolling to Jake's number. Her finger hovered over the call button for a full minute before she set the phone down. She had no right to call him now when she needed help. She'd made it clear that she didn't want him in their lives, and it would be unfair to reach out just because she was scared and alone. But 20 minutes later, when the doctor emerged with a serious expression to tell her that Kyla had pneumonia and would need to be admitted for observation and 4 antibiotics, Tanisha found herself calling Jake's number before she could think twice about it. "Tanisha." His voice was confused but immediately concerned. "Is everything okay?" "No," she said, and suddenly she was crying. "Kyla's sick. She's really sick and she's in the hospital and I'm all alone, and I know I don't have the right to call you, but I didn't know who else." "Which hospital?" Jake's voice was calm but urgent. "St. Mary's. The emergency room." "I'm on my way." Jake arrived 45 minutes later, still in his work coveralls and carrying a small stuffed elephant that Tanisha was sure he'd stopped to buy on the way. He found her in the pediatric ward waiting room, where she was slumped in an uncomfortable chair staring at the floor. "How is she?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "They're getting her settled in a room," Tanisha said, not looking at him. "Pneumonia. They said it's not unusual in kids her age, but it looks scary when it's your kid, you know?" "I can imagine," Jake said gently. "Have you eaten anything today?" Tanisha shook her head. "I couldn't. I keep thinking about how she asked for you this morning when she was feeling bad, and how I couldn't give her that because I was too scared to." "Hey," Jake said, reaching over to cover her hand with his. Don't do that to yourself. Kids get sick. It happens. It's not your fault. I meant what I said the other night, Tanisha said quietly. About being scared. About not knowing if I could trust you. But Jake, these past few days without you, watching Kyla missing you myself, I think I made a terrible mistake. Jake was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. You weren't wrong to be scared, he said finally. I've been thinking about what you said, and you're right that I don't know what it's like to be responsible for someone else's heart the way you are for Kyla's. I don't know what it's like to have been abandoned when you needed someone most. But you were abandoned, Tanisha said, looking at him for the first time since he'd arrived. You were 8 years old and you were put in foster care. That had to be terrifying. It was, Jake admitted. But I was the kid in that situation, not the parent. I didn't have to worry about protecting anyone else. You do. You have to think about Kyla first, always. And I respect that, even if it means you decide I'm too much of a risk. Before Tanisha could respond, a nurse appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Williams? Your daughter is asking for you. And she keeps mentioning someone named Jake. Tanisha looked at Jake questioningly. Would you like to see her? I mean, if you want to. I'd love to see her, Jake said, standing and offering Tanisha his hand. Kyla's hospital room was small and sterile, filled with the quiet beeping of monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen. The little girl looked impossibly tiny in the hospital bed, her curls spread across the white pillow, and 4-line taped to her small hand. Mommy? Kyla's voice was hoarse but alert. Is that Jake? Hi, kiddo, Jake said softly, approaching the bed. I heard you weren't feeling so good. I got really sick, Kyla said, her eyes brightening despite her obvious exhaustion. But I knew you'd come if Mommy called you. I told the nice nurse that Jake always comes when we need him. Tanisha felt tears slip down her cheeks at her daughter's absolute faith in Jake's reliability, even after days of his absence from their lives. I brought you something, Jake said, producing the stuffed elephant. His name is Peanut and he's very good at keeping sick kids company. Kyla clutched the elephant to her chest with her free hand. He's perfect. Thank you, Jake. I missed you a lot. I missed you too, sweetheart, Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. More than you know. They stayed until visiting hours ended, Jake reading stories from a book the hospital provided while Tanisha dozed fitfully in the chair beside the bed. When they finally left, Kyla was sleeping peacefully, her fever beginning to break. Thank you, Tanisha said as they walked to the parking garage. For coming. For being here when I needed you even after. You don't have to thank me, Jake said. This is what people do for each other when they care. But I hurt you, Tanisha said, stopping beside her car. I said awful things because I was scared, and you had every right to write us off completely. Jake turned to face her fully. Tanisha, I'm not going to pretend that what you said didn't hurt. It did. But I've had 3 days to think about it and I understand why you said it. You're protecting the most important thing in your world. I can't fault you for that. I don't want to protect her from you anymore, Tanisha said quietly. I want to protect what we could have together. All 3 of us. If it's not too late. Jake stepped closer, close enough that she could see the hope beginning to kindle in his blue eyes. It's not too late, he said. It's never too late for something real. I'm still scared, Tanisha admitted. I probably always will be, a little bit. But I'm more scared of losing you than I am of trusting you. Then trust me, Jake said, reaching up to cup her face gently. Trust that when I say I'm not going anywhere, I mean it. Trust that when I tell you I love you and Kyla, I'm not just saying words. I want to, Tanisha whispered. I want to so much. Then do it, Jake said, his thumb brushing away a tear from her cheek. Take the leap with me. Let's build something beautiful together. As they stood in the hospital parking garage, surrounded by the sterile lighting and the distant sounds of the city, Tanisha felt something inside her chest finally unlock. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by something stronger, hope, love, and the absolute certainty that this man holding her face so gently was worth fighting for. Okay, she breathed. Okay, yes. Let's build something beautiful. When Jake kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise, Tanisha felt like she was coming home after a long journey. It was a beginning, she realized. Not just of a relationship but of a family. The kind Kyla had been asking for all along. The kind that was chosen and cherished and built on love rather than obligation. The kind that could weather any storm. Kyla came home from the hospital 2 days later, still weak but significantly improved and clutching her stuffed elephant like a lifeline. Jake had visited every day, bringing coloring books and small toys and an endless supply of patience for a cranky, recovering 6-year-old. "I want Jake to carry me inside," Kyla announced as they pulled into their driveway. "My legs feel like spaghetti noodles." "I think that can be arranged," Jake said with a smile, already getting out of his truck. He'd followed them home from the hospital, and Tanisha felt a warm glow of security knowing he was there. As Jake gently lifted Kyla from the car and carried her toward the house, she wrapped her arms around his neck and said something that made Tanisha's heart stop. "Jake, when I was really sick and scary, I kept thinking about how I wanted my daddy to come make me feel better. And then you came and I did feel better. Does that mean you could be my daddy?" Jake stopped walking, holding Kyla carefully as he processed her words. Over her head, his eyes met Tanisha's, and she saw a mixture of joy and uncertainty there. "That's a pretty big question, kiddo," Jake said gently. "What do you think it means to be someone's daddy?" "Taking care of them when they're sick," Kyla said immediately. "And reading bedtime stories and fixing broken things and making mommy happy and staying forever even when things get hard. Those are all very important daddy jobs," Jake agreed, carrying her into the house and settling her on the couch with her elephant. "But being someone's daddy is something that all the grown-ups have to agree on together." "Mommy," Kyla said, turning to Tanisha with a kind of serious expression that looked funny on her young face, "do you want Jake to be my daddy?" Tanisha felt her cheeks warm as both Jake and Kyla looked at her expectantly. That's a conversation Jake and I need to have privately first, baby." "But you like him, right?" Kyla pressed. "Like really, really like him? Like more than ice cream?" "More than ice cream," Tanisha confirmed with a small smile. "Good," Kyla said, settling back against the couch cushions with satisfaction. "Because I asked God to send me a daddy and I think God sent Jake. It would be rude not to keep him." Later that evening, after Kyla had been tucked into bed with strict instructions to rest and recover, Tanisha and Jake sat on the front porch swing, sharing a cup of coffee and listening to the peaceful sounds of the neighborhood settling into night. "She's pretty direct, isn't she?" Jake said with fond amusement. "Subtle as a brick," Tanisha agreed. "I'm sorry if that put you on the spot. She's been fixated on the idea of having a father figure since she was old enough to notice that other kids had daddies and she didn't." "Don't apologize," Jake said quietly. "Do you know what it felt like to hear her say that? To know that this amazing little girl thinks I could be worthy of that role?" "You are worthy of it," Tanisha said without hesitation. "You've been more of a father to her in these past few weeks than her biological father ever was." Jake was quiet for a moment, staring out at the yard where fireflies were beginning to flicker in the gathering darkness. "Can I tell you something? About why I never thought I wanted kids?" Tanisha nodded, sensing that this was important. "I spent so many years moving from home to home, never really belonging anywhere, that I convinced myself I didn't know how to be part of a family," Jake said. "I thought that because I didn't have good examples growing up, I wouldn't know how to be a good father or husband. I thought I was missing some essential piece that other people had." "What changed your mind?" "You too," Jake said simply. "Being around you and Kyla, seeing how natural it felt to care about someone else's happiness more than my own. I realized that maybe the essential piece isn't something you're born with. Maybe it's something you choose every day." "Jake," Tanisha said softly, reaching for his hand. "I know we haven't been together very long," Jake continued. "I know that what Kyla is asking for, what I think we're both hoping for, is a huge step. But Tanisha, I can't imagine my life without you both in it anymore. When you called me from the hospital, when I thought about something happening to either of you and me not being there, it terrified me." "What are you saying?" Tanisha asked, though her heart was already racing with hope. "I'm saying that if you're willing, if you think we could make this work, I want to try. I want to be the man who takes care of Kyla when she's sick and reads her bedtime stories and fixes her broken toys. I want to be the man who makes you happy and supports your dreams and shares the weight of all the big and small decisions that come with building a life together." Tanisha felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I want that too," she whispered. "I want it so much it scares me." "We'll figure it out together," Jake said, bringing her hand to his lips. "All of it. The scary parts and the beautiful parts and everything in between." "There's something I need to tell you," Tanisha said, her voice suddenly uncertain. "About Kyla's father. About why I'm so scared of trusting someone with our hearts." Jake waited patiently while she gathered her thoughts. "His name was Brandon," Tanisha began. "We were together for 2 years and I thought he was the one. He talked about marriage and kids and growing old together. When I got pregnant, he seemed excited at first. He helped me pick out baby furniture and talked about teaching our child to ride a bike. What happened? Reality set in, Tanisha said bitterly. The sleepless nights, the financial pressure, the way pregnancy changed my body and made me emotional and needy. 3 months before Kyla was born, he sat me down and told me he'd made a mistake. That he wasn't ready for the responsibility. That he'd found someone else who was easier to be with. Jake's jaw tightened. He left you when you were 6 months pregnant? He left me a check for $5,000 and a note saying he hoped I'd understand that this was better for everyone, Tanisha said. I haven't heard from him since. He's never met Kyla, never asked about her, never tried to be part of her life in any way. I'm sorry, Jake said, and the fury in his voice was tempered by genuine compassion. That must have been devastating. It was, Tanisha admitted. But you know what the worst part was? It wasn't the abandonment or the heartbreak or even the practical concerns about raising a baby alone. It was the way he made me doubt my own judgment. I was so sure about him, so convinced that I knew who he really was. When he left, I started questioning everything I thought I knew about reading people. Is that why you pulled away from me? Jake asked gently. Because you were afraid you were wrong about me too? Partly, Tanisha said. But also because I could see how much Kyla was already counting on you. The way she lit up when you walked into a room, the way she started including you in all her plans for the future. If you left like he did, it wouldn't just be my heart breaking. It would be hers too. Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she told him. When he spoke, his voice was firm and sure. I'm not him, he said. I'm not going to make promises I can't keep or run away when things get difficult. But I understand why you need time to believe that. How much time? Tanisha asked. However much time you need, Jake said. Whether that's 6 months or 6 years, I'm not going anywhere. What if I said I'm ready to believe it now? Tanisha asked, surprising herself with the words. What if I said that these past few days watching you with Kyla at the hospital, seeing how you dropped everything to be there for us? What if I said that showed me everything I needed to know about who you really are? Jake turned to face her fully, hope shining in his eyes. Then I'd say that I love you, Tanisha Williams. I love your strength and your devotion to your daughter and the way you make a house feel like a home. And I love Kyla like she's already mine because in my heart, she is. I love you too, Tanisha whispered, the words feeling like a prayer and a promise all at once. I love how gentle you are with her, how patient you are with my fears, how you make both of us feel safe and cherished and worth fighting for. When Jake kissed her this time, it was different from their kiss in the hospital parking garage. This one was a claiming, a covenant, a sealing of promises made and accepted. This was the kiss of two people who had found their way to each other through all the obstacles and fears and were choosing to build something lasting together. So, Jake said when they finally broke apart, how do we tell Kyla that her prayer worked? That God did send her a daddy, and he's planning to stick around. Very carefully, Tanisha said with a laugh. Because once we tell her, there's no going back. She'll start planning the wedding before we've even figured out what we want for breakfast tomorrow. Would that be so terrible? Jake asked, stroking her hair. The wedding part, I mean. Eventually. No, Tanisha said, surprising herself again with how sure she sounded. That wouldn't be terrible at all. As they sat together on the porch swing, wrapped in each other's arms and the promise of their shared future, Tanisha felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. The fear was still there, probably always would be to some degree, but it was overshadowed by something stronger. Love, trust, and the unshakable knowledge that some people really did stay when they said they would. Inside the house, Kyla slept peacefully with her stuffed elephant, dreaming of a family that was finally whole. 2 months later, on a crisp Saturday morning in October, Jake Thompson stood in the kitchen of the house that had become his second home, making pancakes while Kyla sat at the table drawing pictures of what she called, our new family. Jake, Kyla said, holding up her latest masterpiece. Does this look right? I drew you and me and Mommy and we're all holding hands and there's our house and your truck and my red car. It looks perfect, Jake said, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. You're quite the artist. I'm making it for you to keep, Kyla announced. For when you move in with us officially. Jake glanced toward the stairs, where Tanisha was getting ready for their planned day at the park. They hadn't talked about him moving in yet, though he'd been spending most nights here for the past month. Kyla, however, had been dropping increasingly less subtle hints about making their living arrangements official. That's very thoughtful of you, Jake said carefully. But moving in together is a big decision that grown-ups have to make together. I know, Kyla said with exaggerated patience. But you basically live here already. Your toothbrush is in our bathroom, your coffee is in our kitchen, and you know where all the good Band-Aids are. Plus, Mrs. Patterson says it's silly for you to keep paying rent on an apartment you never sleep in. Jake bit back a smile. Mrs. Patterson has opinions about my living situation? She has opinions about everything, Kyla said matter-of-factly. But mostly she thinks you should hurry up and marry mommy so I can call you daddy for real instead of just in my head. You call me daddy in your head? Jake asked, his voice suddenly thick with emotion. Well yeah, Kyla said as if it was obvious. You do all the daddy things. You take care of us and love us and stay with us even when I'm cranky or when mommy gets worried about money. That's what daddies do, right? Before Jake could answer, Tanisha appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair pulled back in a ponytail and wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look young and carefree. What are we talking about? She asked, moving to pour herself coffee. Kyla was explaining the qualifications for daddyhood, Jake said, his eyes meeting Tanisha's with shared amusement and something deeper. Oh really? Tanisha raised an eyebrow at her daughter. And what are those qualifications according to the expert? Taking care of people you love, Kyla recited seriously. Staying even when things are hard. Being patient with questions. Fixing broken things. Making pancakes on Saturday mornings. She paused thoughtfully. Oh, and loving the mommy so much that you want to keep her forever. Tanisha felt her cheeks warm as Jake's gaze intensified. Those are pretty good qualifications, she said softly. I think so too, Jake said, setting a plate of perfect pancakes in front of Kyla. In fact, I think those might be the best qualifications I've ever heard. They spent the morning at Riverside Park, where Jake pushed Kyla on the swings while Tanisha sat on a bench nearby, watching the two most important people in her life laugh together. The autumn air was crisp and clear, painted with the gold and red of changing leaves, and Tanisha felt a contentment she'd never experienced before. Higher. Kyla called out, her legs pumping as Jake gave her another push. I want to touch the clouds. One cloud-touching swing session coming up, Jake called back, giving her an extra push that sent her soaring. Jake. Kyla called out suddenly. Can you catch me? I want to jump. Kyla, no jumping from swings, Tanisha called out automatically. It's okay, mommy, Kyla said. Jake will catch me. Daddies always catch their kids. The word hung in the air like a challenge and a hope. Jake looked from Kyla to Tanisha, silently asking for permission. Tanisha found herself nodding, trusting him completely. Okay kiddo, Jake said, positioning himself in front of the swing. But you have to wait until I say it's safe. I trust you, Kyla said simply, and the faith in those 3 words made Jake's chest tighten with emotion. When Kyla jumped, Jake caught her easily, spinning her around once before setting her safely on the ground. She threw her arms around his waist in an enthusiastic hug. See, she said, looking up at him with shining eyes. I knew you'd catch me. You always catch me. Later, while Kyla played on the playground equipment, Jake and Tanisha walked the tree-lined path that circled the park. The leaves crunched under their feet, and the afternoon sun filtered through the branches in dappled patterns. She's really settled into thinking of you as her father, Tanisha observed. I hope that doesn't make you feel pressured. It doesn't make me feel pressured, Jake said quietly. It makes me feel honored. And terrified. And grateful. Sometimes all at the same time. Terrified. Jake stopped walking and turned to face her. Terrified that I'll mess it up somehow. That I won't be good enough for either of you. That I'll make some mistake that hurts her or disappoints you. Jake, Tanisha said, reaching for his hands, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to love us and show up and do your best. That's all any parent can do. Is that what I am? Jake asked. Her parent. If you want to be, Tanisha said. If you're ready for that kind of responsibility and commitment. Jake was quiet for a moment, watching Kyla across the playground as she climbed the monkey bars with fierce determination. I've been thinking about something, he said finally. About making this official. Making what official? Our family. All of it. Jake turned back to Tanisha, his blue eyes serious and intent. I know it's only been a few months and I know that by most people's standards we're moving fast, but Tanisha, I can't imagine my life without you two in it. I don't want to imagine it. Tanisha felt her heart start racing. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to marry you, Jake said simply. I want to adopt Kyla if you'll let me so she can have my name and I can have the legal right to make decisions about her welfare and be her father in every way that matters. I want us to be a real family, officially and forever. Jake. Tanisha breathed. I know you're scared, Jake continued. I know you have every reason to be cautious about making big commitments. But I also know that what we have is real and worth fighting for. I know that I love you both more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. And I know that I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that some promises really are kept." Before Tanisha could respond, Kyla came running over, her cheeks flushed from playing and her eyes bright with excitement. "What are you guys talking about?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. "You look very serious." Jake looked at Tanisha questioningly, silently asking if it was okay to include Kyla in this conversation. Tanisha nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Well," Jake said, crouching down to Kyla's level, "I was just telling your mommy that I love you both very much, and I was wondering if maybe you'd like me to be your daddy for real." Kyla's eyes went wide. "Like officially? With papers and everything?" "With papers and everything," Jake confirmed. "If your mommy says yes and if you want me to." "Are you kidding?" Kyla threw herself into Jake's arms so enthusiastically that she nearly knocked him over. "Yes. Yes. I've been wanting you to be my daddy forever." "What about you?" Jake asked, looking up at Tanisha over Kyla's head. "Will you marry me, Tanisha Williams? Will you let me be Kyla's father and your husband and the luckiest man in the world?" Tanisha looked down at the two people who had become her entire world. This man who had walked into their lives and filled all the empty spaces with love and laughter and stability, and her daughter who was practically vibrating with joy at the prospect of finally having the daddy she'd been praying for. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." Kyla shrieked with delight, doing a little dance around them. "We're going to be a real family. I have to tell Mrs. Patterson, and Mrs. Chin, and my teacher, and everyone." "Wait," Jake said, standing and pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I think we're forgetting something." Tanisha stared at the box in shock. "You have a ring?" "I've been carrying it around for 3 weeks, Jake admitted. "Waiting for the right moment. Or maybe waiting for the courage." The ring was perfect. A simple solitaire that caught the afternoon light and threw rainbows across Tanisha's face. As Jake slipped it onto her finger, Kyla clapped her hands in delight. "It's so pretty," she exclaimed. "You're going to be the most beautiful bride ever, Mommy. Can I be in the wedding? Can I call Jake Daddy now? Can we get a puppy?" "Slow down," Tanisha laughed, though tears of joy were streaming down her cheeks. "One life change at a time." "Actually," Jake said, looking at Kyla with a smile, "you can call me Daddy anytime you want. You don't have to wait for the wedding." "Really?" Kyla looked between them with wonder. "I can call you Daddy right now?" "Right now," Jake confirmed. "Daddy," Kyla said, testing out the word, then broke into the biggest smile any of them had ever seen. "Daddy? I have a daddy." As the three of them stood there in the golden afternoon light, wrapped in each other's arms and the promise of their shared future, Tanisha marveled at how completely her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been a single mother struggling to make ends meet, convinced that fairy tales didn't happen to people like her. Now she was engaged to a man who loved her daughter as much as she did, who treated them both like treasures worth protecting, who had turned their small family of 2 into something bigger and stronger and infinitely more beautiful. "Sir, I don't have a daddy. Could you fix this?" Kyla had asked that first day at the auto shop, breaking Jake's heart with her innocent hope. Looking at them now, her daughter radiant with joy, her fiancé looking at them both like they'd hung the stars, Tanisha realized that Kyla had been right to believe in the power of fixing broken things. Sometimes the most important repairs weren't the ones you made with tools and spare parts. Sometimes they were the ones you made with love and patience and the willingness to believe that some people really did stay when they promised they would. Their family hadn't been broken after all. It had just been waiting for the right person to help make it complete. Dear readers, thank you so much for taking this emotional journey with Tanisha, Kyla, and Jake. Your support means the world to me. This story was inspired by the belief that love can heal even the deepest wounds and that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose. I'd love to hear from you. What was your favorite moment between Jake and Kyla? Did you see yourself in Tanisha's struggles with trust and single parenthood? Which scene made you cry the most? I'm betting it was either the hospital scene or the final daddy moment. Do you believe in love stories like this one, where broken hearts find healing? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback helps me write stories that truly resonate with readers who believe in the power of love, family, and second chances.